Hey everybody, Jason Burmis here, and I just want to start out of the gates saying that last night I came across the documentary series put on Vice that basically tried to explain the origins of the Q story. And there were some things that I really liked about it that I thought were good. There were other things that I think are extremely dangerous and abhorrent. And there's certain aspects of it that I wonder why they left out. Because there's so much importance to a lot of the key things that were left out of the story, especially during the second part, but throughout. So we're going to address all that. And if you're unaware of what I'm talking about, okay, there is a series out there, okay, and it is called In Search of Q. Okay, The Search for Q. And if you look, the first episode is What is Q? And then it's Who is Q? And why does Q exist? And again, they got a lot of it, in my opinion, at least right on the mythos if you go down the rabbit hole into what this really was. And then you have a lot of things that are dismissive of reality. And the two people that are putting it on, they're like the set. You see them sitting across from each other. That's like the setup. That's like the true TV Jesse Ventura conspiracy theory show setup. But this is hipper and cooler because you have, the female political insider and then the hipster documentary filmmaker who's seeing war-torn Middle East for himself. And that's not to denigrate these guys, all right? Because I honestly, there were parts where they reached out especially and humanized one of these Q personalities. Winter, I think, is his last name, okay? And basically, by doing so, they showed at the end, at least they had some things in common. But the things that they reinforced, especially when it comes to fortifying the elections and conceding and then showing, what I think was, contextually, more violence than what actually happened at the Capitol, based on what they perceive to be a total lie, which is that anything funny could have happened in the election, right? That's dangerous. And then especially, when it's all this whole satanic pedophile thing and adrenochrome and not addressing where those things actually came from, the child trafficking. And what basis in reality they had PreQ and how Q was not only manipulated to marginalize those claims, but then make them so fantastical that any of the real stuff that we're about to cover would never really be looked into. And that's a huge problem. The biggest problem, however, okay, is that it's a push for more domestic terror laws. And that was the most disturbing part of it. That somehow this Q phenomenon now makes it so that we have radicalized people, that we need to have this domestic terror stuff ramped up on the American people. Okay? That's the big issue here. So I wanna go back over here. I want to remind everybody that you saw that Rockfin stuff, right? That's because we're fully demonetized. We got our first strike for the Alex Jones interview. Medical misinformation. That's what they said to me. $5, $10, $15, big donors. Need you now more than ever. But what I really need is for you to make that free account. I think right now we're 14 away from 12,000 followers. Listen, guys, everything for the next 2 weeks is free. Tomorrow at 11 a.m. Eastern time, we are going to have a live free exclusive only at the Rockfin, only at the Rockfin, only at the Rockfin. And again, if I get deplatformed from YouTube, which may happen, Rockfin. That's where I need you to. I need you to share the Rockfin links more than ever. Tell people, hey, please make that free account. It's an email address. Please, 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 please. So Loose Change, Final Cut, Fabled Enemies, Invisible Empire, A New World Order to Find and Shade the Motion Picture. They're free right here, right now. And if you are watching on YouTube, let's get the thumbs up. Let's subscribe and share because this is going to be in depth. All right. So when this is my Q journey. Okay. When I am working for We Are Change a bit on the side at this point, I haven't even gotten full time. People are sending me this stuff. And finally, Luke asked me to look at this PDF file that's compiled of it. Throughout the whole thing, I go, dude, I don't believe in fairy tales and superheroes on message boards. Out of the gates, this thing, when it popped up in 2017, it was like post Bilderberg that I became aware of it, right? Because that's where I first went down there and saw Luke and ran into some of these figures that would later become popularized, like Lauren Southern, okay, like Jack Posobiec. Then you also had people like Owen Schroyer show up. David Knight was there. David Knight, to his credit, never pushed this stuff. Ever. Secret indictments, none of it. So good for him. Because I never believed any of that stuff. I was like, this is incredible. This is nonsense. So anyway, I start looking at these PDFs and supposed proofs, and I go, there's nothing here. This is ridiculous. There's nothing pointing me to something that wasn't information. And at the time, especially, I was scouring the news, especially when I went full-time at We Are Change. I was scouring the news daily, and I was seeing like actual stories, and then the Q people would kind of pick them up and distort them, right? And I remember my buddy trying to tell me that there was, a raid at the Rothschilds' home and helicopter crashes. And even that, I was like, this does not seem like it's real. What is going on here? So anyway, as this progresses and I'm working for We Are Change, I have a talk with Titus Frost, who, Titus, I respect a lot of his work, especially in the pedogate stuff. Okay, when you get into those WikiLeaks emails and you get into, especially the group email about the Lozado children taking an Uber to a farm as entertainment in a pool. Okay, I think 8, 9, and 11. And their ages are there and their names are there. No thinking human can't be like, what is this? Okay, so I'm just going to leave it there. If you want to see Titus's stuff, it's out there still. Okay, you can find it on some platforms. The guy's been banned so many times. You'd have to go find him over at Twitter. So anyway, in fact, he just got deplatformed on PayPal. So anyway, he starts to explain to me about a group called Cicada 301. And at first, I have listen, these aren't my worlds. 8chan, 4chan, Cicada 301, groups like this. Out of everything that he's telling me, the only thing I'm really familiar with is DEF CON. And then he starts talking about people like Dreamcatcher, who's James Brower. And then he starts talking about Microchip, who nobody seems to know who Microchip's name is. Okay? And then Defango, a.k.a. Manuel Chavez. And you start going down that path, and they actually did go down that path and interviewed Chavez. Okay, Defango. Now, here's the thing. I went down that path in 2018, and I got Dreamcatcher, and that's Brower, and I got Defango, Chavez. Okay? I couldn't get Microchip. Now, Microchip gave Posobiec an interview. All this stuff, all of a sudden, all these worlds are colliding. Now, here's the thing. I don't know how much of the story is true by Defango and how much of the story is contrived, okay, if anything. But Vice did cover that aspect of the story because their names keep coming up for good reason. Now, even before that, they feature a Jason Goodman interview, okay? Now, this is PreQ. And one of the things, about this is where I'm going to give them credit. And we'll get to some of the big concerns, okay, a bit later. Because the origin story, I think there were parts that need to be covered. For instance, Brower isn't in there at all. They never talk about InfoWars either. And I'm not trying to throw Alex under the bus, but when you look at Corsi in his time there, Corsi was doing these decodes right? And they said it was an abbreviated list and whatnot. But when you talk about, they talked about bakers, right? And they end up getting into Robert David Steele. It was curious to me that they went to Robert David Steele and this Goodman incident and this whole debacle, and they didn't mention that Robert David Steele was pushing stuff like, for instance, child sex slavery on Mars, on the Alex Jones show prior to that. I mean, there were a lot of things to bury Robert David Steele. They call him RDS. And one of the other things is that really concerns me about Steele, and one of the reasons I never had him on the show, I don't like to throw these people under the bus, but when you talk about grifting and people like David Wilcock, I can't not talk about grifting. So they also talk about the grifting aspect of this and people who know it's fake, but they're making a lot of money on it. But then they get into the political aspirations, Flynn, et cetera, et cetera. I think all that is legitimate. And we're going to get into more of it. Okay. So, man, I mean, there was just so much about this. I encourage people to watch it, by the way, if you can find it. The first part's available, but you can catch it on Vice. They're replaying it. So now you have this whole hodgepodge of what they did include and what they didn't, especially with Steele. And Steele was the first guy to really talk about In-Q-Tel. Okay, so in the beginning, Steele, in like 2008, 9, 10, I think, when he broke onto the scene, and no one's ever said, debunked him being in the CIA, ever. Because there are questions about that. Okay, so did he really get out of the CIA, or is he just totally supposed to be disinformation? Gave you good information at first? He talked about, the origins of Google, seed companies, all these things that were very, very real. And then he jumped shark. Now, did he jump shark because he saw more money in the grift? Because even then, there was this PreQ idea of Nasara and white hats. All this stuff was like pre-brewing Trump grifts. There was even stuff that Wilcock and a guy named Benjamin Fulford were pushing with the Yakuza and the Japanese Illuminati and the Asian Illuminati. And there was this big war going on. Guy, you can't make this stuff up, right? That was there. And then there was a 9/11 grift also, with the secret indictments grift after Scooter Libby got arrested, that everything was going to be okay post 9/11. They were going to start arresting Dick Cheney and Wolfowitz and all these guys, and there were secret indictments. And that was Tom Flacco. So a lot of these grifts had already been tested and put out there, these disinformation grifts. And the genesis of this somehow begins with Q, right? Now, again, they get some of this, but they left a lot of this out. And if little old Jason Burmis can at least get this, and you have so many less resources, and a long time ago, by the way, right? Because I interviewed DeFango. DeFango's a total troll. It's hard to tell, right? He gets off on lies. He gets off on drama. In fact, he tried to get at me, I don't know, 3-4 weeks ago. It might have been when the Vice thing was coming out, because I missed it. It came out like 3-4 weeks ago. And he said something to me, but he tried to feed me bad information on the Dark Overlord documents a couple times. And some people buy into this and buy into the drama. He got into it with Gabe Hoffman. I mean, the other thing that you got to understand, guys, is when you start looking at DeFango, then you have to look at Shadowbox. And this is where it gets really eerie. And a guy named Thomas Schoenberger. Okay, so now with Cicada 301, another thing with Schoenberger, and they actually do go over this in Vice. And this is what's good. They talk about Schoenberger a lot. And Robert David Steele doesn't want to talk about Schoenberger at all. Now, apparently there are chats out there. There are emails between them on this grift, all this stuff. Now, Schoenberger's in all sorts of court cases. He's been in these chats many times. Not only the We Are Change ones, but these ones. Okay? And I stay away from people like that. I stay away from anybody that's causing drama, that's in court. But here's where it gets interesting. When I talk about Shadowbox, we're talking Seth Rich. We're talking about Butowski. We're talking about recorded phone calls with Seymour Hersh. All stuff we covered. They don't touch that. They don't touch that. They don't touch that connection with Chavez and Schoenberger and WikiLeaks. okay, and the rich family and the wiki. I mean, none of it. They don't touch any of it. Why not? So you're not touching Brower, you're not touching Corsi, you're not touching any of that. That's interesting to me. Now, there is some focus also out there on the origins of the forums that were allowing it to post and flourish for all the hits and the profits, and 8kun, and then, you know, before that 8chan and 4chan, and how it was distributed. Now to Vice's credit, okay, they did cover, I think, that part fairly, and Schoenberger's stuff comes up. And by the way, Isaac Cappy, we're going to have to talk about him because that's where we really get dark and they get into, okay? They're good at showing that, and I think that's a good part of it, right? But at the end of the day, they take away from where all this stuff actually originated from, the reality stuff, because the WikiLeaks documents are reality. The Seth Rich stuff is reality. This stuff is connected to some really harsh, dark realities, and that's where we're going to get into Isaac Cappy. So they start talking about Cappy, and for anybody that doesn't know, I think I still to this day did the definitive interview with Isaac Cappy. I pre-recorded it. I made sure that I could cut it up with evidence, so anything that was said that he knew about firsthand, we could go with, and anything that was not backed up, we would just say that those were allegations being made by him. Okay? So here's the deal. Cappy, as at least in a first-hand scenario, claimed, was his claim, and they don't even bring up this claim. Remember, everything was discredited. They showed the Tom Hanks stuff, and they showed the Spielberg stuff, right? And to me, it's like, well, you know, when we talked about Spielberg, for instance, and the allegations against him, and I played it, we talked a little bit about Heather O'Rourke, and I documented what went on with Heather O'Rourke and what these allegations were and who was making them, because there was a website, I'm not sure if it's still out there right now, but it was given these tips and had a lot of tips on Epstein prior and Brian Singer prior, and it was it's killing me because now I have to go back. It's been so long. This has been years ago now. And I had talked to Cappy privately. You know, I wanted to know what he knew firsthand. But he was making accusations about, Seth Green and his wife. And them talking to him about chicken and basically child abuse and showing them a fake room of bunk beds and the whole thing. Now, did that happen? I don't know. That's what he said firsthand. And really, those were never, ever addressed by Green and his wife. I'll be honest. I stopped watching Robot Chicken after that. Now, Cappy himself, come from Hollywood, you know, I didn't know how stable he was, you know, what he was into, what he wasn't into, what he was up to, because you have no clue. Okay? All of a sudden, like he's pushing this guy, Vegan Mikey, on me and other people. And some people are calling it, it's this Voodoo Donuts thing. He actually brings up the Voodoo Donuts thing in our interview. I was unaware of it. But later tries to do it. I don't bite. And all of a sudden, you know, you're talking about drugs and all these other things in the mix. And Cappy is connected to Schoenberger and Cicada 301. And, you know, all Cicada 301 really was, and who knows if Schoenberger even started it. I mean, he's such a sketchy, weird character. I could tell you about some stuff behind the scenes. You know, like that I'd rather not talk about. You know, in fact, I need to have a discussion with somebody about some more things about that behind the scenes. But we're talking about, you know, him being served with a lawsuit, Schoenberger, for defamation. But Shadowbox, you go check it out yourself. So they didn't even mention Shadowbox. It's really weird. And when Cappy killed himself, and I do believe he killed himself, let's just say this. There's words that might have been part of another sick game that these people get off on. Just to do it. And he killed himself. I looked at the evidence there. I mean, he jumped off a bridge. I mean, there was I mean, there was I did a big video on it. He had lost himself. Before he did that, probably called me about 2 months before that. And he was talking about John McCain had been executed at Guantanamo Bay and all this stuff. And I just kept telling him, man, listen, a lot of these guys are lying to you, dude. This isn't happening. It's not real. There's nobody going to save you on message boards, bro. This is all fake. And he was lost. So in that respect, they also kind of hover on that. I can give it to him. Good. Here are my big concerns. Okay? Q people and, these people. Number one, you do not want to censor information. Oh, I went to the wrong thing. Look at me. Wrong one, guys. Oh, by the way, go check out that video earlier today. Because that's a great example. When you talk about high-level trafficking and you talk about Hollywood, right? I just covered Disney and Bella Thorne and her being abused from the time she was 6 to 14 and saying everybody knew around her. And that's real. All right? But then they want to talk, they want to bring up all this disinformation and Johnny nonsense and, Tom Hanks has been arrested because they don't want you to talk about the real people in the industry, the Bryan Singers of the world, the stuff we learned about Kevin Spacey, right? And then they want to also tell you, don't worry, they're all going to be arrested and dealt with this. No one's doing that. We got to step up to the plate and put pressure on these people. So let's continue. We're talking about high-level pedophilia in government. Forget about just Hollywood that we covered. 100%. Let's stop acting like Dennis Hassert doesn't exist or that he was a Republican. Somehow this, is not a Republican or Democrat issue. That's a high-level official that you think he stopped abusing boys after he was a gym teacher and a wrestling coach. You think he stopped? That was when he was done. We got more power and money and made his way all the way up to the Speaker of the House. How about Anthony Weiner? How about Ed Murray? I keep going. Mark Foley. Like all these guys got outed way before QAnon. And then we're going to get into the Franklin scandal. We're going to get into the fact that, not only do you have the Franklin cover-up, right, but the Franklin scandal, the one by John DeCamp and the one by, not John DeCamp, Nick Bryant, that's extremely well-sourced, that talked about call boys in the White House. Let's start talking about Barney Frank and how it was connected to Chevy Chase Elementary. And a call boy ring with Gottlieb out of his house. Let's keep talking. These things happened. Let's talk about Prince Andrew and Epstein. Let's talk about the Clown and the Candyman now. And Richard Lang. I hope somebody sends this to these documentarians because everything I'm talking about is real. For instance, even in the MK Ultra days, guys, when they were running underage brothels on the coasts. Go read Chaos. I mean, there's so many eerie connections there with Charles Manson and our government. Okay, let me get something straight. The predator class that controls people loves to compromise people, but then has, in some cases, has a sick delicatessen for children and call boys in some instances. Lord Mountbatten would be yet another example of that. I could continue. Like, we could put in Roy Cohn on blast. Like, this is all, like, the real stuff. And it's not Republican or Democrat. And all of that is just kind of by the wayside. None of that real stuff is brought up. That's where it's rooted in. Okay? So now we're going to get into the adrenochrome, what that's really rooted in. Okay. And then we're going to get into the occult stuff because it's satanic pedophiles. We just did all the pedophile stuff, right? I mean, everything I just talked about is real. 100%. And that was a big problem with me, and it was all pre-Q. People knew about it. You know, I mean, it was out there. I think even an Open Secret's like at least 5 years old. The one that really blew the lid off of Bryan Singer and started that movement of people looking at Hollywood. Okay. So adrenochrome. They portray it as some kind of drug that they use, which is correct, but they don't talk about the origins of where that really comes from and where we can get into bloodletting rituals. The other thing is they try to turn it anti-Semitic, right? And they bring people in like Will Sommer that want to cancel speech and people and not have a debate from the Daily Beast. Daily Beast has done some really good stuff on Epstein, but then you have this guy talking about it. And it's like, well, let's really talk about where this bloodletting stuff comes from, because it's not anti-Semitic, and that's not really where the adrenochrome stuff comes from either. It's Crowley-esque. And then it was kind of popularized by Hunter S. Thompson. Let's talk about it. And by the way, can we get over 100 thumbs with 300 plus watching? So Aleister Crowley, as the incantation of one of his many demons and then writings, talked about the most powerful type of sex magic. Remember, this guy was big into sex magic. Was taking a virgin boy from behind and at your climax, cutting his throat. And then drinking his blood. Okay, the most powerful type of sex magic. And then that ritual, is really where it was popularized amongst these people. Now, bloodletting rituals, they're centuries old. Okay, I'm not saying that like that's the first time that's actually it. But it's that gave it that extra power. Young boy, cut his throat, climax, drink his blood, the whole thing. We can get back to Dracula. All those mythos of bloodletting. There's nothing anti-Semitic about it. Okay? In all types of dark or left-handed occultic magic, you can find examples of that, and sacrifice, right? So that's where you get that. When I say popularized by Hunter S. Thompson, you have that scene not only in the movie, but obviously in the book, where the lawyer, talks about it. And I believe it's in the book where it's like a sheriff that takes a woman into the bathroom, or it was cut from the film, and they actually kill her, and that's where they get it. Basically this woman in fear. Okay? So once again, those things, have happened throughout history. And now we're going to bring them full circle to the elite. We cannot deny that the Bohemian Grove exists and that they are doing some type of occult practices there, especially with the cremation of care and their owl deity. And before that, their large Buddha and their Druidic rituals. They are doing that. Okay? And that historically has been a place long before Q, long before I was born, the decisions were being made, especially in the building of that national security state that I rail against to this day. Post-World War II, the Eisenhowers, the Reagans. But we go before that. That's where the Manhattan Project is born, where nuclear war and power is gamed out at a place where they have literal occult practices. And then you go to, even before that, as a lot of these guys are prepped in their little secret societies like Skull and Bones. So for them to give no relevance to like a Skull and Bones that John Kerry was a member of, and George Bush, his dad, George Bush Sr., his dad Prescott was a member of, when I have them during one of their initiation rituals saying, the devil equals death, death equals the devil on a human sacrifice, it's an invisible empire, you can't say that there's nothing to that or that was popularized by Q. Okay? And the thing is, they weave in 9/11 truth into this is, this is dangerous and that's dangerous. And then to build a narrative where we can't question elections, all the stuff that I just talked about is like, you're just a QAnon liar. And then now you could be a domestic terrorist. It's extremely dangerous, guys. Whether you think you did that or not, you did it. Those are my big concerns. Okay? So, I mean, you know, aside from that, I think they did a good job of showing the Flynn connection, at least at the end of this. And whether Flynn was involved from the very beginning of Q or it got taken hold of by Flynn and associates, he maneuvered it for sure. Trump maneuvered it for sure. I talked about it when finally someone asked Trump about it, and Trump leaned into it. And he leaned into it. And then you bring it full circle with the quote unquote, you know, capital not an insurrection. At the end with a Q shaman. It can't get more cartoon level. It can't. And I know so many of you out there. I mean, how many subscribers did I lose in the last 2 months, guys? I'm negative subscribers the last 2 months. Like by the hundreds. Never happens. You know, forget about just the banning, the deplatform. They don't like me. They don't like that I was able to call out the nonsense and then I can rattle off truth like that. So I would tell people to please, you know, go check out the documentary. At least the first part is over here. Tell me what I got right. Tell me what I got wrong. Tell me what you thought Q was. Have you owned up to, you know, the PSYOP aspect? I mean, they talk to so many military intelligence officials, you know, that are calling for more legislation about this. We don't need more free speech laws. You take bad speech and you debunk it like I do and you take the flack for it. And then you put out the good speech like I do and you take the flack for it. And you don't play games like you're a conservative or a liberal or a this or a that. You're beholden to the truth. And that's it. Or, you know, you don't play team baseball. $5, $10, $15 big donors mean the world to me. The Go Get funding is right there. If you want to surpass that, you know, it's at, what is it? jasonisvoid@yahoo.com. That's the PayPal. All the links are below. There's a ton of ways to do it. But really, what I need now, we're 14 people away. Only 14 of you, the 350 plus watching that have not signed up for Rockfin yet. Go make the free account. Go make the free account tomorrow at 11 a.m. Eastern time. We're going to have a live and exclusive only at the Rockfin, only at the Rockfin, only at the Rockfin. We're going to get spicy. We're going to do that Time Magazine read-along part 2. The read-along part 1, free there now. Plenty of free videos that you haven't seen because I was banned from YouTube for a week that are a little too spicy for YouTube anyway. So that free account is, you know, a big deal. Follow me. If you do want to support me there, $9.99 a month. All the premium stuff, all the backlog stuff, everybody else's stuff. Thank you so much. And thumbs it up, subscribe, and share. Check out all the docs for free. Loose Change, Final Cut, Shade the Motion Picture, Invisible Empire, A New World Order Defined, and Fabled Enemies. I love you guys, and I'll see you on the flip side.